and geometry all linked together, so that art training wasn't just for exceptionally talented people. It was for people that, felt deeply. And who is that? That's all of us. And so everyone got a chance to have a drawing, introduction to drawing. So in my book, I try to channel some of the lessons that we get from these old art manuals. And here you can see on the left, there's these dots. You connect the dots, and dots become lines. Lines become shapes. Shapes become letters and images. So you would have, perhaps as you're practicing those lines, you would look throughout images of art and find, wow, I drew a diagonal, and there that painting is nothing but a diagonal. Or finding, when you look around, this is John Ruskin, and the watermark on the right covering it would give students a chance to practice their lines on the left and then draw on top and find the lines in the watermark on the right. The interesting thing about John Ruskin was he believed that everybody should learn to draw. And because he didn't think there should be two classes of people, those who worked with their hands for a living doing manual labor, and those that worked for their heads for a living doing kind of white collar work. He thought that the people who worked with their heads should also work with their hands, and those who worked with their hands should also work with their heads, and that everybody could use a little more beauty. So here we have the diagonal that you'd practice on the left. You have to forgive me, my neighbors are redoing the roof, so if you occasionally hear some high-pitched drilling. So looking for the diagonals, and so you're using diagonals to make part of the letter A. You're also seeing it in the energy and the excitement of a Gericault drawing. And this is from a book of Renaissance calligraphy. And here you can see some of those same principles that would animate a painting or drawing also be used in the constructions of letters. So this idea of playing with line goes all the way back. This is an image by Albrecht Dürer in his Dresden notebooks. And you can see him just having fun and saying, haha, I see a line of the forehead that's tilting back. What if I were to play with that same line against the nose or against the chin? What about in reverse? So this sense of intense observation of the world around us, lighting up our imagination. So this idea of craftsmanship or learning a lineage, a particular kind of language in art is always used in the interest of greater observation of the world. And the more we observe the world, often the more beautiful it is. And strangely enough, the more beautiful our own lives become. So if you have that idea of Hemingway saying that so much joy could come from the noticing of water drops along a fishing line, well, when I look around my own ordinary life, wow, that could be the something of great, could be the subject of great art. I don't have to be a spectator in someone else's life. So I think learning traditional skills is such an act of awe and humility and just really joy. This is a picture I probably shouldn't have taken. I was studying at the Pierpont Morgan Library and couldn't resist just kind of getting this shot. This is another one of Dürer's notebook. And if you put your hand up next to the screen, I don't know, the left hand, do you notice that your pointer finger also veers to the left and that little tip of the middle finger? So him noticing how these divisions that he's seeing in his own hand create a bridge to art history from one person to another, hundreds of years apart. Here's from a model book from the 18th century, and you can see another artist exploring and having that moment, this very day, seeing the link between, past and present and future as they look around. So here is Da Vinci's drawing where he's finding the angles of the face, looking for relationships. And this is a page from my sketchbook from the beginning drawing atelier book. And on the right is a blank version of the drawing. So the idea here is that the student would find those lines in the blank head. And then, when they're sitting at dinner and they're looking at their parents and all of a sudden the words fade out and they see, wow, You know, the line from the ear connects to underside of the nose to the corner of the mouth. And now he's seeing through Da Vinci's eyes and can in turn create new work for his own time using the language of the past that's held up so well, that's derived from nature. So here, for example, you find Giacometti doing the same thing as Da Vinci did, running those lines through, seeing what relates to what. The principles are timeless, but the application can be absolutely contemporary. So this sculpture, which I love, being nothing more than the letter, you know, it could be the letter A or just the triangle. And now you're walking into a cathedral and you see it based on the human body. You see that strength and stability that comes from a repetition of that shape. And looking at, this is William Blake with Job and his daughters huddled into that pyramid shape, representing strength, stability. So many of you might see this turn of the last century drawing book for children, and here they're using these shapes to be able to help students deconstruct a fox or create a fox. And it's interesting because these forms, yes, they're abstracted and you could say they're put on nature, but you could also say they're distilled from nature. And there's a long lineage to this as well. So this is an 18th century drawing book exploring what makes a lion look so fierce. So finding that triangular shape of the face. And if you have cats at home, you can still see this triangulation in their faces as well. And then if you look below at Hercules, the strength of the lion is superimposed on that face of Hercules. So geometry, you would say, or abstraction from nature being used to accentuate an emotion. And this is pretty interesting too. This is a Rubens notebook. And you can see that same morphing of the triangle being inserted in and pulled out of the head, making that head look so strong. Here he's combining him half man, half lion. And here Rembrandt's triangle shell. And you have to imagine that if you can get so much pleasure from staring at one little shell, you have a whole lifetime of enjoyment, even if you never leave home. So just a pencil, a paper, a set of eyes, and knowing what to look for can open up so many things. So here you have the pentagon and the pentagram, and you see how many times it's played with color and size, shape, rotation. One of this pages of my sketchbook, I've pulled out from different manuscripts, flowers and butterflies. And here you can see these simple shapes. And the goal for the student is to, you know, can you find the shape in the natural form? And if you can find it in this natural form, when you're on a hike, you can see it too. And it's at that moment when you feel that resonance that it's almost like a curtain being pulled back and being able to see, you could say that see the face of God, or you could say feeling part of something that's larger than yourself, that extended beyond you, that existed before and will extend after, a sense of place. So here are also some botanical drawings from the National Agricultural Library. And the same thing, being able to use simple shapes as a foundation to block in more complex ones. So from my book, I have the block in where it's no longer just a triangle or pentagon, but these more abstract, complex shapes to begin to describe whatever you want. And so removing language where you're no longer looking at as a bird or a lion, but these simple shapes really transforms just anybody actually into an excellent draftsman, and sometimes an extraordinarily gifted one over time, in much the same way that learning piano, you put enough time in, you're going to be impressive. And so here, this is a page from the book as well, where you can see the stages of block-in to simple still life above, and then space to draw below. And we're in a mediated age where things are remote. So here, by spending time doing a block in and copying a leaf, you could step outside and grab a leaf. So the principle behind the book is this one of master copy or emulation, a little hand holding, and then using that as a point of departure. So this on the right is a master copy drawing of the Belvedere torso on the left. The history of art is really a history of master copy, stepping on the shoulders of people before us, and then adapting it to our own purposes. This is interesting. The sculpture on the left, you're all familiar with it, was dug up in the time of Michelangelo. And the drawing on the right was the drawing by Rubens of it, but he did so many. I couldn't figure out which one to put in. It was so many. So let's see. Here we have a Michelangelo on the left, and on the right, a Raphael copy of a Michelangelo. And it's hilarious because it's, like one of those filters on the phone where it's half Raphael and half Michelangelo in the same drawing. Ribera, Giuseppe the Ribera, that kind of just a monumental force of emotion and passion in art. His model book for the training of painters using the eye. So here in the 19th century and in early America, people loved model books because it gave you a chance at home to practice. So this is a Charles Bark lithograph plate. They're really pretty big, about the size of your arm when they're printed. And there was a stack of them that was done in the 19th century, and artists would copy the image on the left because the image on the left showed you how the artist thought about it, how they simplified it in order to use it as a scaffolding for the drawing on the right. So students would work through this before working from life. So I wanted to read this to you because it might sound remote or purely academic, but this was written by Van Gogh, who went through loads of these, as did Picasso. Careful study and the constant and repeating copying of Barg's exercises have given me an insight into figure drawing. I've learned to measure and to see and to look for the broad outlines, so that, thank God, what seemed utterly impossible to me before is now gradually becoming possible. I no longer stand as helpless before nature as I used to. And that's the whole goal, is to give people a voice, to not stand helpless or quiet in the world that we live in, but to be a force in it. So this is an image of 18th century atelier. And atelier is just another word for studio. So you have to imagine in the past, there weren't big art schools like there are now, or universities. So if artists wanted to study, they would study in the studios of trained painters. And that tradition still exists today. And the idea behind it is that we better learn the principles of drawing and painting if they're broken down into very small segments. So you learn a few lines, how to make vertical, diagonal, horizontal, and gradually build up. And in the atelier, you would learn a year or so of drawing and then go to black and white paint and expand out. This type of training was brought to America through people like Thomas Eakins and others. This is a picture of the cast hall at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art in Philadelphia, which was the very first art school in the United States. You can kind of see they have a full scale David, and you can see his elbow. You can see how big that is on the left. So this is another form of master copy, students working from casts. This is a picture of my atelier in Seattle, Washington, where people learn much the same way as they did in the past, with the idea that anybody can learn to draw, anybody can learn to paint, and everybody should have the right to be able to do that if they want to, through making it accessible. So I'm going to show you a few examples of student works. This is one of the students working in class. We have a partnership with the Frye Museum, so students can work from originals if they want. this is a funny thing. One of the bars in Seattle commissioned the students to do master copies, all based on a maritime theme. It's a cider bar. And so the students did master copies for this place. And this I wanted to include because it's a really great example of what we do. This is a giant mural in the downstairs of the bar. So one of the same fellows who did that traditional master copy here did a giant bar fight. I wish I could scroll it in further so you could see it. You'd see the artist is about to be punched in the face by his girlfriend. The artist's dad hitting somebody over the head with a bottle. I mean, it's just hilarious. The image on the left is a master copy by one of my students, Joshua Langstaff. And the painting on the right is his version from life after he did that master copy. So you can see he spends a minute learning the old technique and then immediately applies it to do what he wants. This is a student who is graduating from the program. His wife and 2 daughters are in the lifeboat, and he lived through Hurricane Katrina, and he wanted to do a painting that honored that time for their family. And so he took his training and did a scene. It's got his brother and friends. This is another one of a student, 1 year copying Titian, the next year doing a self-portrait. Another who was trying to do a portrait of her mother and decided that the thing that captured her mother the best was her hands. This is a woman who graduated not last year, the year before, and she was studying in Paris when the building was arsoned, and she jumped out of the window. A number of her friends didn't survive, but she was covered with burns and had to learn to walk again. And one of the things she wanted to do is honor people who look different from others, and she's covered with scars. She painted her arms and wanted to show that there can be beauty in people just as you are. So I would like to end with just a few pages more from the book where you can see drawings on the left and places to practice. And I'm going to end here, but my point with all that is that with the sketchbook, that people would be able to be like me as a little kid, where you want to squirrel away and just have time of study and have your own thoughts and be able to take some of this great tradition and look around and find our own voice and ways to use it. If you think about it, academic art and traditional drawing and painting wasn't given to many people. There's so many people whose voices have never been added to art history who now will have the chance to, and who knows what kind of work we're going to get. It's going to be really exciting. So I'd like to open this up for discussion. Oh, but one more thing before we do that, I'd like to share with you my idea for how that book got started. I was going to Europe and I had 24 hours where I was going to sit on the plane. And I thought, boy, I need an artist activity book, but I don't know who's made an artist activity book. So I took master copy pieces that I wanted to study, and I taped the drawings on the left and left blanks on the right, and just killing time at the airport. You know, artists hate to be bored, so it didn't matter if they made me wait. I don't care. I was busy anyway. And I put on the front a quote from David White, that you must learn one thing, that this world is made to be free in. Give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong. And that was the genesis for the book. Thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to talking with you more.
Thank you so much, Juliette. That was a really beautiful presentation, and what a powerful thing to share with our teachers and our students. So thank you so much for sharing that with me, sharing that for us. I apologize for everybody here, because there are a lot of art teachers in the room right now. So if you have any questions for Juliette, this is your moment, to ask anything that you like. One thing, okay, so we have a question coming up, and so James is wondering if, as a classical skill-based art teacher, you're worried about cancel culture and the effect it could have on future teachings.
So Mandy, can you interpret that for me?
So I think there's a concern that maybe that classical art might get canceled, or a feeling of maybe that's old school and might get canceled. Do you think that there's a possibility of that?
Yeah, in a way it doesn't. It didn't exist when I was a kid, really. So it was obliterated. And in a way it's coming back. I don't really think so. Yes and no, not for long term. And I'll tell you why. Imagine if no one ever taught you to write or read. You'd be free, but freed for what? And so with learning some of this basic language of art, it does nothing more than give every single person, anybody who wants to, the right to speak for themselves, and to be able to learn to draw, to be able to take a pencil or a pen and a sheet of paper and have the whole world open up to you, and in a way that will also be readable or intelligible for hundreds of years after. So there is the risk. People can say whatever they want, but it's not, I don't see that as a legitimate thing. I'm not going to rob someone else of the opportunity to learn based on someone else's fear.
So there's a lot of notes in the chat being like, oh, I'm going to take a book with me, or I'm going to do that the next time I go on a trip. And so I do have my copy of Juliette's book, which I do take with me on trips, because the way that she created this book is that there's space in the book itself to do your own drawing. Like, you're intended to draw on this book, in this book. And Juliette and I had quite a few conversations, when she was taking on this enormous project about how do we create a book that's usable in the classroom? So Juliette made a decision to make sure that there were no nudes in this book, for example, not because she doesn't believe in the human figure, because she's one of the greatest proponents of the human figure you'll ever find, but that she wanted to make this accessible, this knowledge accessible, and this type of training accessible to art teachers and their students in the classroom. So this is a great resource, not just for you, but also for pulling lessons out of. Each one of these drawings is an amazing lesson that's a standalone lesson in the classroom. All right, so also, Juliette, we are getting questions about the master's program in Jersey City. So Juliette, I'm pleased to announce, for those of you who haven't heard, will be joining us this summer for our in-person master's. It's an accredited master's program, and Juliette will be a featured teaching fellow in this program that will be 6 weeks this summer. And so, Juliette, would you like to talk a little bit about what you plan to share with students in the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also just wanted to bring up one more point to James's question about cancel culture, and that one of the, I don't know if you've ever been to Comic-Con or any of that stuff, there is raging interest right now in the human form and belonging and being part of something else. And so jobs in animation industry, and that's actually spurring so much growth in the human figure and traditional classical training. So it's no longer just quite as separate as it was in the past, where academic art was in one corner and culture was in another. It's not seen that way so much anymore. But to the point about the master's program, I am so excited about it. And it's a chance to study and immerse ourselves in the great tradition. And also, our teachers are a lot of fun. Like, I figured that out a while ago. So a lot of conversation and times of being together. 1 day a week will be in Manhattan, and half days will be drawing from casts, which are from the Metropolitan Museum of Art collection that were given to the Historical Society, or the Classical Society in New York. And the other half of the day we'll be spending in museums. We'll be doing readings and discussions. And so over the course of 6 weeks, it is going to be really fast-paced, but also fun. And I never want us to lose sight of the fact that we're not just we're not just learning skills for the sake of skills. It all goes back to just that still small voice of where art comes from. And so the goal with learning this, and with the hopes of being able to teach it to others, is really only in the service of connecting people's eyes to a greater sense of observation, and that with a spark, which will be then used for them to create their own art. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's always in the service of something else, and it is not a opportunity to learn for the sake of learning.
Absolutely. So I'm super excited to be partnering with, such an incredible artist, such an incredible author, with Juliette, to offer the best education we can for our teachers. And we're getting some great art teacher questions in the chat. So one of our participants tonight is asking, what about elementary? Like, how can you take what seems like pretty complex information and share that with younger students?
I just had an opportunity to do that over a 10-week period, and I was humbled by what they were able to do and learn. And it was borderline humiliating how quickly they picked this up. And their attention span was really good. So I'll give you an example. So for example, we would have a leaf exercise where you do the geometry of a leaf, and then go out and find a leaf, see the geometry in that, bring it in, and then we used it with walnut ink to do paintings from it. And so all these things are able to be broken down in a way that become as fluent as if it's a first language when they learn it that young. The dilemma is they learn it so quickly they might not know how important these, they learn it, they don't know what it costs. It costs a lot for you to give this stuff to them.
Yeah, so I've definitely had similar experience to what you're talking about, Juliette. When I first started getting this atelier training, this atelier knowledge, I was teaching in a K-12 school. So I would have like high school kids, and then second graders, and then middle schoolers. And I just started teaching everything I could at younger and younger ages. And I couldn't believe like how much they can actually understand. And in my experience, second grade is really where I can teach them any concept I would teach an adult, just in smaller pieces. And I was in disbelief even as they were doing it. So I totally, feel you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few more questions. What do you do when it's difficult to teach someone, or like you have a challenging student? How do you work with challenging students?
The more of a kind of, artists are difficult people sometimes. They can, if you get a true artist, like I can tell, the story of Princess and the Pea, where the woman comes in from the rain and she gets this bed, a free bed. They're so kind to her. And in the morning she wakes up and complains because she can feel 30 mattresses down like a little pea. She doesn't have to, you don't need the birth certificate to know she's a princess. She's an absolute princess. And so artists too, if an artist comes for a tour of an atelier and I ask them to write something down and they can't find their pen, they're a real artist. I know it, if they show up a half hour early, a half hour late, or on the wrong date entirely, I don't blame them. That's the way God made them. They're artists. And so artists, the artist brain is beautiful and unique. So I always try to find another way to reach people. So for some, you can learn to see by writing just as much as you can by drawing. So you can approach things, if line, some students have a very difficult time with line. And so for them, I teach them via mass, or some people will never be a draftsman, but through color, they have a exceptional ability. And so I'll often find that the gifts are distributed unequally. The same person who excels at one thing will not excel at another. So I almost always assume that there's something else they're good at. And if their work isn't good and they're applying themselves, it's always my fault. They shouldn't come in with the skills. So it's my job to figure out how to get it to work for them. Yeah.
That's very cool. So I definitely agree with you there, like trying to, what different students are good at different times, and, I find that's really hard to get students to focus on their own work. Sometimes they see a fellow student going off in one direction and it's like, don't worry about what they're doing, worry about what you're doing, So we're getting some questions about, the interest a lot of our students have. I know that a lot of my kids have this interest, and let me know in the chat if you guys have this too. And we're getting a few questions about it. A strong interest in anime and, that type of kind of science fiction type drawing. you know, what's the, is there a link? How could this training help those students that are interested in anime?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we're kind of in a place where there's two inherited artistic traditions, and one comes from the Renaissance, which is imaginative and constructive, and the other one is from photography, where people you can kind of bypass that kind of understanding and go for pure mimicry. Anime, you kind of have a cross segment. If you go to some of those early drawings by, you know, like Rubens, the one I showed, where the horse, that, you know, there's ones of horse's head and men's head being combined, or with the lion and Hercules, like we showed. So there is, if you go back far enough with pattern, there can be, but it's worth pursuing teaching them observational drawing, even if they're not that interested, because I get frequently animation studios and like digital arts colleges sending students to me to become trained, say, look, get their portfolio together and then send them to us. They're expecting now students to already have those skill sets of being able to draw from life. And so even if it's not a burning interest with them, maybe spin off part of it to the construction of anime, but part of it just stressing that, look, it will give you an edge later. And then even for people who never go into art, the time they spent learning this will help with their understanding of art. It could make them, it will give them confidence to be able to buy art, to go into a museum, to look at art. And if nothing else, artists need very little to be able to keep themselves amused. And today, when there's so little time for observation and deep thought, the time that you give them with pencil and completely unmediated experience could pay off in ways that we just don't see now.
Absolutely. So we definitely have some other great questions coming up. I just want to let all the art teachers out there know that there is a Facebook group that is Atelier based that you can join and you know, ask advice from Atelier trained artists or your fellow art teachers if you're looking to implement this. It's a free resource for you, so I encourage you to join that group. And Juliette, we have another question here, and it's one that I get a lot, and I know that I grapple with, and I know that I've seen when I studied with you, people grapple with this. How do you convince people to practice drawing when they're like, ooh, paint, I wanna paint, I wanna paint? Like, how do you get people to like focus on drawing when that's what they really need, when what they think that they want is painting?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I can't think of a single person who says, wow, I want to, you know, learn to draw for the sake of drawing. Everybody wants to paint first. And that's really, you know, it's natural. That's the way it should be, I guess. But then you find that the language of drawing, visual literacy is tied up in the language of drawing. So learning to see is going to happen with the pencil before it happens with the brush. Ideas of proportion and shape, composition, even, you know, light, shade, everything but color and paint handling is covered first in the act of drawing. And so eventually what happens is they become addicted to how good they get once they actually train themselves to hit those weakest points. They can't hide behind anything. And so, you know, you can't reach everybody, but there's a legitimate reason for breaking it down and teaching drawing first. And there's a reason why that's always the way that it was taught in the past. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's very true. Now, I would like to point out that in the master's degree summer program, because we have a condensed amount of time, we're trying something new where we are doing 3 intense weeks of drawing, and then we are transitioning to 3 intense weeks of painting within that 6-week program. So it'll be really exciting to see how much you know, we can cover in the drawing phase, you know, when we make that transition to painting. I'm really looking forward to that challenge. Okay, so we have this like insisting on painting, and then you know, there's so many great comments here, and again, please make sure to put your comments or questions in the chat. So Juliette, where did you train in the Atelier method, and how did it change your approach to art and spark your passion?
When I left high school, I decided that the thing that most made me feel alive in this world was just drawing and painting. And I wasn't quite sure where to go. I went, ateliers were not so common then. And of course, there's no internet. I ended up with this in the small studio of a guy named Myron Barnstone, where we studied design principles. I was at a small college before that, but I had to spend so much time doing other things, and I wanted to just dive into art. So I spent a year with him and then went to Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art for 3 years in Philadelphia and just hit on the foundational. I hit one year after another, just getting a solid foundation. I didn't care how long it took. So after 3 years, I heard about the atelier movement and went to Minneapolis, where at the time, most of the ateliers, there was only a handful of ateliers in the world at that point, and most of them were in Minneapolis. And so I went there and spent another 3 years studying it. You might not know his name, but Atelier Lack. He was the Atelier movement exists because of Richard Lack. It's his baby. It was in the United States when I just mentioned that the Pennsylvania Academy of Art was the first art school. The Americans before that and at that time would go off and study in Europe at places like with people like Jerome. Jerome was a really popular artist for Americans to study with, and he was apparently a really cool guy and gave people a lot of freedom, because when they came back, you find Thomas Eakins painting things around him like the skull boat racers and all that, immediately applying it to everyday life. And so a lot of the atelier movement springs from these small studios in Paris. There were also some in Germany as well. And so the American painter William McGregor Paxton studied with Jerome and came back and taught a guy named Gamel, and Gamel was Lack's teacher. So Lack set this up in Minneapolis, and that became the beginning of the atelier movement. He was absolutely devoted. And he unfortunately became ill and stepped down, and his two teachers that were co-teachers with him ran the atelier. So I was there for 3 years and then moved to New York City to study with a guy who trained directly under Gamel, and then moved to National Academy of Design in New York City, studied with a guy named Jacob Collins, and then became a founding member of Water Street Atelier. Sorry, it's really long. And I did that for many years, and then moved to Seattle and started my own atelier at that point. And I'm in the 22nd year up at Gage Academy in Seattle. So a lot of hunting around. So you're in a golden age of being able to have access to this information without moving all over the place.
Oh man, so
sorry, that was a lot.
Yeah, no, it's true. And a lot of atelier journeys are meandering, because it's not like there's a college until our summer program is really one of the first university programs that's atelier based. But it's counterintuitive, because you think, oh, I need education, I go to college. But because of the way atelier training evolved separately from the collegiate system, it became an outlier, and it wasn't regularly accessible in most colleges. And I know, at least in my art education training, that nobody had that type of knowledge or training to give me, when I was going to school to get my art degrees or my art education degrees. So it's really great to see where you found the pieces, especially pre-internet, like how you found them and put them together. We do have a really important question, that came up in the chat, and it's kind of talking about, is there a way to teach this knowledge? Is this knowledge Eurocentric, and does it have to be taught that way?
You actually find a huge amount of it in Russia and China, and I just did a new Masters Academy juried competition. Almost all of the winners are from Brazil. You get so it's no longer, and it might have started with Greco-Roman art, from that part of the world, and eons ago kind of made its way through Western Europe and into the Americas and that kind of thing. But the visual language is one that is not particular to any one group. So for example, in my book, I use other people like Hokusai's work because he was using the same principles. So you can, and you know, a class that I just taught recently was solely taught to Chinese students and using a lot of imagery that comes from their culture. So it doesn't have to be taught through you know, any one lens any more than learning an alphabet would force you to have one particular stand. And in fact, in my book, I didn't plan it this way, but almost all the figures in the book are of African American or Latino or other people, not on purpose, just because those were such beautiful drawings that jumped out. And so the excitement over this type of thing is not limited to any one person. And I would hate that. I'm a you know, Jewish American immigrant from another country. I would hate to be pegged to one particular kind of form of representation. That's not our job.
Right. And this is a Julio Reyes drawing on the cover, is it not?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you know, I think about too, you know, we have math that we use Arabic numerals, right, in math. And then we also have the Pythagorean theorem, which is, you know, would be considered a Eurocentric principle. But in art, you know, if you look at the Japanese prints that were like flooding into the United States at the turn of the last century, it kind of changed the way people were dealing with the depth of space. So linear perspective is one way to solve the problem of depth of space, but changing your edge quality, like how soft or hard your edges are, is another way to show depth in space. And that was incorporated into like the body of knowledge of visual literacy. So it didn't all come from one place. It came from many places, and it continues to grow within many cultures.
And it's, you know, we own this stuff, so we liberate it. If it's in bondage in any place, it's for us to free it, you know, to free this stuff up and make it accessible for a new time and new people.
All right, so I think we have time. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay, Mandy. One more question.
Yeah, I think we have time for just one more question, and it's a good one. Do you have plans to write any more books?
Thanks for that question. None at all. I've done 6, and the 6 books really came from how hard it was for me to learn these techniques. And and at the time when I was studying, none of us knew if it would survive at all. And so it was something that motivated me just to make sure it was all compact to save someone else the trouble. And if it went dark for a decade or two or generation, that it would still be able to be refound. Fortunately, they are being, that's not the case.
And I do have to warn all of our audience members, especially the art teachers out there, that Juliette's books are very, very dangerous, because I was teaching in a K-12 classroom when I read Juliette's first book, and then I left my job, moved to Seattle, and started training with her because I was so moved by the content she had to share in her vision for art. So, you know, warning, this book will change your life.
Well, thanks to you, we had tons of fun over those years. We wouldn't have had nearly as much fun if you weren't there, Mandy.
Oh, thank you, Juliette. Well, I'm excited to bring all the fun to our summer master's degree program that'll be based out of Jersey City, New Jersey, just outside of New York, where we'll be spending time in museums, and we'll be training full-on atelier, no holds bar. Like, we're going to give you everything we got. So I want to take a moment to just really thank Juliette for donating her time to the art teacher cause, for, you know, sharing her times and talents with you know, our community, the art education community. And I'd like to thank all the participants for being here. It's such an honor to, you know, have so many of you spending your free time. Like, you must be pretty good art teachers to continuously donate your time and spend your free time trying to learn more about art and helping your students. So thank you all so very much for joining us this evening for Art Delights. So.
Thanks so much, everybody. And next time, I hope to see you with the cameras on, so we could all talk and be together. Thanks, Mandy, for everything. You're amazing. Bye, everybody. Have a really good night. Be well. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Good night. Thank you all so very much. It was such an honor to have you all here. Thank you. All right, I'm going to officially end our meeting. Mwah, big hugs and kisses to all the art teacher community out there. It was a pleasure having you. Take care.